Hi students, welcome to lesson number 10, Patriarchy and Matriarchy. Students, let us start with the introduction. Patriarchy and matriarchy are two forms of social systems between which a key difference can be identified. In different parts of the world, patriarchy and matriarchy were to be seen from the ancient days. A patriarchal system is a social system in which the father is the head of the household. On the other hand, a matriarchal system is a system in which the mother is the head of the household. Hence, the key difference between patriarchy and matriarchy is that while the father acts as the head of the household in patriarchal system, in matriarchal system it is the mother. The objectives of the lesson are to learn the meaning of patriarchy as well as matriarchy, to study the characteristics of patriarchy and matriarchy. Now, let us trace the matriarchy and patriarchy. The matriarchy and patriarchy attempts to reconstruct the existence of ancient matriarchal societies usually depend on the theory of survivals, namely that mythic narratives. The symbols, folk customs or linguistic idioms can be relics of archaic social structures that have been superseded by very different social forms. Comparative studies between cultures separated in time and space, bringing to bear ethnographic, linguistic and textual studies are held to be reveal common origins and evidence of archaic social structures. The 19th century innovators of this technique claim to be able to reach back to pre-classical eras that had previously been inaccessible due to lack of written evidence. Similarly, oral and written mythological traditions in the patriarchal, the Christian era are held to contain traces of pre-Christian thought, faith and ritual which can be recovered through a process of excavation. The archaeological metaphors are commonplace since they can link by analogy the material discoveries with textual interpretation and with psychological and spiritual journeys into the depth of the self. This interpretation relies on ideological interpretation of myth that claims to find it in the repressed memory of real historical events, and on a theory of cultural development that sees societies moving from simple communal structures to more complex individualistic and competitive social relations and associates these social forms with universal male and female principles. There is a tendency to view social phenomena and modes of thought in sexed rather than gendered terms. The world is viewed in terms of male and female principles that are associated with a series of oppositions such as the reason or intuition, individualism or community, society or community, war or peace, concepts or symbol, technology or nature, mind or body, sky or earth, etc. Ultimately, the theory relies on the notions of sex character that developed through the 19th century and which has been systematically critiqued by feminists. The idea of the separate natures of the two sexes reflects the sexual division of labor imposed by the bourgeois household and by the masculine's rationalism of much enlightenment thinking. Women represent the domestic as opposed to the public space, nature, emotion and the body as opposed to the civilization and intellect, and the spatial as opposed to the temporal or progressive. Naturally, one can trace similar oppositions back much further, but the idea of matriarchy in its modern form arises out of a set of 19th century concerns in which the feminine sex character gradually gains huge mythological, the mythical and political significance until it can form the basis of fully fledged matriarchal utopias. Initially, the idea that early cultures had been characterized by relationship between the sexes very different from what had been assumed to be a natural patriarchy, emerged from Enlightenment era attempts to locate an original monotheism that had degraded into the polytheism of the pagan world, or to investigate the history of property relations and family structures. Now, this line of investigation is influenced in the early 19th century by romantic theories of myth and cultural identity, which provide new methods and forms of evidence, as well as introducing narratives of cultural development that seek to unify theories of social structure, cultural change, ethnic and gender identity, and language and symbol. The infusion of romantic ideas into the Enlightenment, the discussions of social status and property means that matriarchy now takes on associations of radical otherness, and it is no longer just part of a discourse, but about the arrangement of relations between the sexes in an enlightened society, but instead about encounters with cultural alienness and archaic layers of the psyche and a rejection of modernity, but wherein the radical challenges to gender hierarchies represented by the experimental lifestyles of the Romantic period, combined with intense theorizing about the separate natures of men and women, laid the ground for the extensive development of matriarchal theories in the 19th century. As the 19th century progressed, philosophers and social reformers began to construct theories of mythic femininity as a counterpart to the masculine field of politics. This development was little more than a mythic clothing of theories of male and female sex character, in which men are associated with the external spheres of history, politics, science, civilization, modernity, reason, etc., and women with myth, emotion, religion, nature, the archaic, the unconscious, etc. Writers and campaigners began to suggest that the modern world could be redeemed by an encounter with a more original, holistic, female or maternal principle which began to take on divine features. Patriarchy is a term very commonly used by feminist scholars and practiced by a clear majority of the population in their everyday lives. A patriarchy, from the ancient Greek word patriarchs, is a society where power is held by and passed down through the elder males. Another way to understand definition of patriarchy is given in the Oxford Dictionary as a system of society or government in which the father or the eldest male is the head of the family and descent is reckoned through the male line. Patriarchy is the term used to describe the society in which we live today, characterized by current and historic unequal power relations between women and men, whereby women are systematically disadvantaged and oppressed. This takes place across almost every sphere of life in the form of underrepresentation in the workforce and in decision-making positions and in government institutions. Male violence against women is also a key feature of patriarchy. Women in minority groups face multiple oppressions, and in this society, as race, class and sexuality intersect with sexism, for example, women's bodies have been at stake in times of war and conflict. At the most general level, patriarchy has been used to refer male domination and to the power relationship by which men dominate women. Matriarchy, on the other hand, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, is a form of social organization in which the mother or oldest female is the head of the family and descent and relationship are reckoned through the female line. Government or rule by a woman or women, and matriarchy fundamentally means a society wherein the power is held by and passed on to the female numbers of the family. At an individual as well as the societal level, in a matriarchal society, women primarily hold power, predominate in the realms of employment, in the decision-making process and control property. Within the academic discipline of cultural anthropology, according to OED, matriarchy is a culture of or a community in which such a system prevails, or a family, society, organization, etc., dominated by a woman or women. There are many studies that show that even societies with matrilineal descent, the power structure is either egalitarian or dominated formally by the father or some other male figure. For a social system to be considered a matriarchy, it would require following culture that define a woman or women in an authoritative stance and their dominance being considered essential and legitimate. Broadly speaking, patriarchy as a way of life has affected men as much as it has affected women. Across the world, with most of the nations being patriarchal in nature, men are forced to be the breadwinners of the family, while women are to be its caregivers. In a modernizing society, the performances of stereotypical roles tend to be compromising. Even such roles remain natural and innovative because of the lack of earning and outside impact. Therefore, gender role reversal is not the solution to address patriarchy, but what is required is liberation from gender roles and stereotypes to empower men and women to pursue the vocations they like and retain basic values and virtues. Now students, let us examine the meaning of patriarchy and matriarchy. A patriarchal system is a social system in which the father is the head of the household, and this household, however, is not confined to the household alone. It can be extended to the entire society, where males dominate in all social, political, economical, legal and cultural roles. For instance, in most patriarchal societies, women were very much confined to the domestic sphere, where they were completely cut off from the realities of the society. One of the best examples for this can be taken from the Victorian era, where women were considered as delicate, fragile and ignorant beings. In the patriarchal society, even philosophers such as Aristotle believed that women were inferior to men in all aspects. This emphasized the idea that the inferiority of women was not limited to biological differences, but went as further as intellectual differences. However, feminist theories on patriarchy highlight that this is merely another social system that has been created to oppress women. Now, what is the meaning of matriarchy? A matriarchal system is a social system in which the mother is the head of the household. In a matriarchal society, the governance of the society is also in the hands of women. When examining the human history, there is little evidence of matriarchal societies, but because most confuse an egalitarian society or matrilineal society to a matriarchal society. Now students, let us examine the characteristics of the patriarchy and the matriarchal social structures. Head of the household in a patriarchal is father, who is head of the household. In a matriarchal, it is the mother. The power holded in both of the structures. In patriarchy, it is patriarchal system. The father has more power and control over the others. In matriarchal system, the mother has more power and control over others. Now, let us examine the property ownership in both the systems. In ownership of the property, patriarchal system, it is the male. In matriarchal system, it is the female. As far as the governance examination is concerned, in the patriarchal system, the governance goes with the male, but as well as the matriarchal system, the government is in the society is among the female. The social scene of the world has always been dominated by the two seemingly opposing concepts, that is matriarchy and patriarchy. Both of them portray the structural formation of the society in question. While matriarchy refers to a kind of society that is dominated by women, patriarchy is a system in which male plays a dominant role. The archaeological and historical studies tell us that ancient societies, which we know today as paganistic in nature, were essentially matriarchal, but in that only the women were given central duties and were respected. But they were also worshipped in the form of divine mothers or the mother goddesses. With the passage of time, as social and religious structures evolved, the authority gradually transferred from the hands of females to those of the males, thus giving rise to patriarchy. But in literal terms, matriarchy refers to the rule by mothers, whereas patriarchy refers to the rule by fathers. Now students, let us examine and let us understand what is the difference between both the systems, matriarchy and patriarchy. Although the two concepts seems to stand in complete opposition with each other, it should be noted that they are not actually as contrasting as they seem. However, there are number of obvious differences between the two social systems. Let us make an attempt to differentiate between the two social systems by placing them in parallel with each other. Matriarchy is essentially a women oriented society wherein all the leadership and authority rest in the hands of women. But patriarchy on the other hand is a social system wherein males enjoy all the powers and control and authority, and women are given subordinate roles. The lineage in a matriarchal societies are also often matrilineal in nature. This means the descent of the younger generation is traced through mother's side. This also means that children get their title from their mother and that the property is passed on from the mother to the daughter. Wherein in a patriarchal society, patrilineal is the nature. This means that the descent is traced from the father and his ancestors rather than the mother, and that the property is passed on from the father to the son. Unlike the matriarchal system, here the children inherit the title of their father and not of their mother. What about the private ownership? The matriarchal approach emphasizes on the private ownership by both female and male of the society of household items, religious items and what are supposed to be magical objects. Here the concept of private ownership pertains to small things which occupy an important place in daily life. The patriarchal approach rests on the idea of only males having right to private ownership. Accordingly, they not only own physical, mobile and immobile property such as money, house, land, etc., but also own people, which include one's wife, children and slaves. Let us examine the views about the nature. The matriarchal system is in nature oriented. The matriarchs regard nature as an organic whole and lay emphasis on maintaining its balance at all times. Owing to this, those sources of energy which do not harm nature in any way are used more, like sun, wind, water, etc. The conservation and recycling of resources are considered important, but in order to maintain the balance of nature. On the other hand, the patriarchal system is consumer oriented. The patriarchs believe that nature has immense resources which can be used by humans in order to make profits, but accordingly nature is considered as a thing to be exploited and often non-recyclable, which is the resources are used up by leaving products that can be harmful for natural balance. What is the outlook in both the system? The matriarchal society is pretty liberal when it comes to research and experimentation. They are open to change and always tend to have a holistic approach of looking at things. They believe that personal experience and observation play a very important role in social progress. On the contrary, the patriarchal society has a very conservative outlook and they do not seem to be very open to change at all times and also tend to discourage research and experimentation if they pose a threat to the established norms. They believe in dissection rather than observation and have a pretty rational approach of looking at things. Now, what is the philosophy and world view in both the systems? The matriarchs look at the world as a harmonious whole. They believe in the idea of several entities coming together in harmony and facilitating the smooth functioning of the universe. Owing to this, the concepts like dualism, triplism, etc., which are founded on the basis of perfect balance between two different and often opposite entities are matriarchal concepts. The matriarchal societies also believe in complete union of man with God and nature, wherein on the opposite side, the patriarchs place different entities of the universe in parallel with each other such that the two separate entities can never meet like they do in the matriarchal system. Therefore, God is separate from man, body from the spirit and so on. It also places certain entities in opposition with each other, possibly in order to lay out the moral code of conduct. So, patriarchs always tend to make a comparison between the good and evil, heaven and hell, and so on. Unlike the matriarchs, rather than accepting that both opposing entities can exist together, it is always attempted either to dismiss or nullify one of them. Now, what is the religious system in both the social systems? In the matriarchal society, polytheism, meaning the worship of several deities, is widely practiced. The mother goddesses are the principal divinities and male gods also are worshipped, but only as their consorts. But furthermore, the matriarchal religion is also pantheistic and in nature, believing in the omnipresence and omnipotence of the goddess and her oneness with universe and nature. Wherein in a patriarchal religion is monotheistic, worship of only one god or entity, or what can be called modified monotheistic in nature. Here gods essentially have a hierarchy, with the major ones occupying a more important place than the lesser ones. Moreover, the male gods are principal divinities and the mother goddess are worshipped as their consorts. What is the accessibility of the divinities? In the matriarchal religion, the goddesses often dwell in places which are easily accessible to humans, such as the caves, wells, springs, etc. Owing to this, they are approachable to anyone and everyone who can worship them out in the open without any hurdle. But in a patriarchal religion, on the contrary, the gods reside in places where humans cannot reach at all, or very rarely, if ever they can. These include places such as the mountain tops, clouds, fire, and so on. Because humans cannot reach their god themselves, the patriarchal religion incorporates a number of middlemen or intermediaries in the form of priests, prophets, and or godmen. Now, what is the nature of worship in both the systems? The worship in the matriarchal religion is extremely joyful and enjoyable, owing to the fact that matriarchal religion is based on ideology and pantheism. Every task that people perform is considered to be sacred and hence is regarded as worship of the goddess. In the patriarchal religion, worship is very serious. There are various myths with regard to the wraths of gods and how several men were cursed because of their wrong deeds. Owing to this, the main emphasis of the patriarchal religion is always on the appeasement of gods rather than pure selfless worship. What is the morality? Now let us examine the morality in both the systems. Matriarchy is a very open social system which does not have any hard and fast moral code of conduct that people are expected to follow. Morality in matriarchy is a very personal aspect wherein people are allowed to have their own way as long as they are not harming or disturbing others. Patriarchy lays down a very strict moral code of conduct which people are expected to follow, come what may be the result. These rules are essentially governed by religion, government, etc. Patriarchy always seeks to teach people the difference between the good and the bad, right and wrong, and so on. Let us examine the sexual orientation in both the systems. A matriarchal society is often sexually open and sex is regarded as a religious expression. Owing to this, all kinds of relationship, the heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual, etc. are acceptable to the matriarchal society. But in a patriarchal society is often sexually repressive. This is because sex here is considered to be of two kinds. One, that is for procreation, in which case it is considered to be a sacred, while the other one is lustful love, which is regarded to be sinful and brings shame. And moreover, a patriarchal society essentially accepts only the heterosexual relationship and is largely homophobic. What about the marriage system? In a matriarchal society, monogamy, polygamy and polyandry are acceptable forms of marriage. Moreover, people can also choose to stay in open relationship. In the patriarchal society, however, women are expected to practice strict monogamy, while men are free to get married more than one time. unless otherwise bound by the religious laws. Let us examine the virginity and illegitimacy. The matriarchal society allows its members to choose if they want to indulge in sexual activities or not. Virginity has no place in the matriarchal outlook because this kind of society is open with respect to sexual relationship. Moreover, a mother always knows her children, and so there is no question of illegitimacy. Female virginity in patriarchal societies occupies a very prominent place and is considered to be a virtue, mainly because society is not very open about sexual relationship. Rape is often used as a brutal expression of power and control over the weaker sex. Possibility of illegitimate children is very high in patriarchal society because the father need not always know his children. Matriarchy, which was widespread in historical times, seems to have declined to a great extent today, with most of our mainstream societies now being patriarchal in nature. It is, however, notable that matriarchy still exists not only in many primitive or tribal groups, but around the world, but also in the form of a subculture within patriarchy. So, though we know that patriarchy took over with the passage of time, it is rather difficult to say whether or not matriarchy even ever ceased to exist. To sum up the lesson, the patriarchal system is a social system in which father is the head of the household, and this, however, is not confined to the household alone. It can be extended to the entire society, where males dominate in all social, political, economical, legal and cultural roles. Wherein on the other side we have a matriarchal system, which is a social system in which the mother is the head of the household. In a matriarchal society, the governance of the society is also in the hands of women. Thank you.